Hi, my name is Tim Keller, Mayor of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And let me first say that I'm dyslexic. And I know a lot of folks may know some famous people who are dyslexic, like Einstein or other names people throw out. But for those people who have family members who are dyslexic or individuals suffering from dyslexia, I know the important thing is actually the story behind everyone who has to deal with dyslexia. And so today I'm going to share a little bit about my own story when it comes to dyslexia. And I know it may not be relevant to everyone. I think folks who understand dyslexia, which is very difficult to understand, know that there's a full spectrum when it comes to dyslexia, and that each story in many ways is unique, but there's also some similarities. And so I'll share with you mine, and hopefully it's helpful to some of you watching. You know, like most dyslexia stories, things begin at early childhood. And so I remember actually at an early age, I was put into a Catholic school really so that I could get more attention with some early issues around second and third grade with respect to learning. And in that school, because it had smaller classrooms and things like this, extra help, they actually first tested me for dyslexia. And this is back, I'm, for what it's worth, 44 years old. So things were a little different in schools back then, but people at least knew what dyslexia was. And so for me, when I was tested, it was interesting because there was a big stigma around dyslexia among adults. And so my parents actually didn't share with anyone that I was dyslexic, or me as a kid. And all I knew is I was having some sort of challenges. And I think also in a way that I completely understand, in that era, my parents didn't want me stigmatized by having a learning disorder. And in that era, again, people didn't talk about it. They really didn't want to explain it. And so hopefully that's very different now, and I'll get to why in a little bit. So basically, I just got, wonderfully, thanks to my parents, a lot of extra help in school. But here are some of the things that I remember that I know children or parents who have dyslexic children can certainly understand. You know, basic math, always a challenge. I mean, I never really learned math. I just memorized times tables. And with reading, of course, reading was always a challenge. It still is, and I'll tell you more about that. I remember as late as the sixth grade, you know, being asked to read by my parents, to read out loud, because they wanted me to practice and get better. And it was excruciating. I mean, it was torturous. I remember just crying almost every time they made me try and read at length. After a paragraph, I would just get so fatigued trying to sort everything out mentally, and I didn't even understand why, that I just couldn't read anymore. And this really lasted, I mean, up until really 8th grade, and then I just stopped reading. So I read maybe one book in middle school. I probably read about 10 books in all of high school. So I relied, like a lot of dyslexics, on essentially what we call, you know, sort of compensatory things to make it by. I would compensate. Otherwise, I would just learn a bunch of tricks, is another way to look at it. And so I became extremely good at memorizing, developed a very strong photographic memory. I would be able to recite things and talk about things that either I heard or saw, and I had never read anything about them. So I learned how to learn primarily in a different way, by listening and by memorizing. And this, for me, fortunately, actually worked out in many ways. I was able in high school to do, you know, I did fine academically and things like this after a lot of challenges in middle school. But these things would always arise. Dyslexia was always there, and it always showed up in things like standardized testing. So, you know, I was terrible at standardized testing. And standardized testing, I still to this day, is something I am deeply against for all sorts of reasons, but especially for this. And it is in many ways because of what I went through. But standardized testing is, you know, you just can't compensate your way out of those tests. Most dyslexics can't. And so as a result, either you can't take them, you need more time because you can't even read the questions fast enough, or they're set up in a way that actually do make you test your cognitive ability and learning and so forth. And if you've been essentially using compensatory measures for your whole life, that shows up, and it shows up in those standardized tests, and of course you get the results that you see. So I also noticed at the time too, I was studying so much more than my peers. I mean, I would have to study sort of 3 hours, whereas even in high school, one of my colleagues would have to study 1. And so I was fortunate to have a lot of support, whether it was tutors and things like that. And I grew up in a middle-class household with certainly some white privilege, and I know that really helped me get through it. But it also makes me very, very aware of individuals who are dealing with dyslexia who don't have that, and how important it is that we need to support and understand dyslexia, which is, of course, one reason why I share these stories with you now. Now, I also want to note that along the way, always, there are amazing teachers, and whether they know you're dyslexic or not, they understand different ways of learning, or parents or friends or colleagues, and how important it is to understand that people learn in different ways. I could not learn in the traditional way, and so I'm very grateful to dozens of folks along my life who gave me a chance to try and succeed academically, but through a different path, in a different way. Now, I want to tell you a little bit more about adulthood and sort of college, again, for those of you who feel that's more relevant to either your situation or family or friends. And college for dyslexics, again, depending on, even getting into college and so forth, can be a real challenge depending on the severity. And for what it's worth, at least the last time I went through some testing, there was an 8-level scale, and I was a 7, which is almost as dyslexic as you can be. And so for me, college was incredibly difficult. It was extremely hard. I had trouble even academically staying in school and staying in my classes. I had to transfer out of several because I was failing. Now, again, I was grateful. I went to a wonderful university, and I was able to find classes and areas of study that just matched where I was at in terms of academics. And so grateful for that, and I know not everyone has that opportunity, but nonetheless, it always hurts when you're failing something. And so I definitely remember what that was like. Now, I also know that folks who suffer from ADHD, which there are some similarities to dyslexia and some relationship there, but there's also some differences. And for me, one big difference is I developed very strong skills of concentration and compartmentalizing. And that often is, of course, a challenge with folks with ADHD. So I'm fortunate I didn't have to deal with any of that. But even now in my current job and so forth, I became extremely good at staying focused and concentrating because I had to literally even read something. And I also started relying heavily on listening to lectures. I would try and tape lectures. Of course, now at this point, technology is catching up. This is when I first started reading, book tapes. They used to be on cassette tape. And I would get everything I can in a format where I didn't have to read. And so nonetheless, college was a challenge, but again, worked out for me with a lot of these support systems and different ways to compensate. And I want to talk about adult dyslexia in a moment, but I want to pause here because I think especially if your children or somebody you know has dyslexia, I want to mention that I've referenced compensatory skills quite a few times. With young children, I phrase this as the gift of dyslexia. And this I got actually from a book, which is funny because it was really hard to read the book, but it was about dyslexia and it was called The Gift of Dyslexia. That book changed my life. And it's because it essentially teaches anyone who's reading about this that the wonderful thing about the human brain is if you can get the right sort of supports around it and the right alternative learning methods, dyslexics tend to also have a gift to do things extremely well. And if you can find those, and if they're children who can discover this, you can phrase this in terms of a superpower, which kids tend to get excited about. And I've certainly been able to find those in my life, which I'm grateful for. There's different tests you can take on this, but there's something often referred to as closing speed that has been a gift that is inherent with my dyslexia for me that is off the charts. It's baffling to people. You take these tests where little flashes of light pop up and you have to predict where they're going to go next. And I'm like 99 percentile in those. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying that there are gifts associated with dyslexia. And those can help you in other ways. So again, for me, it was about developing things like a photographic memory and powers of memorization. And sort of rapid problem solving. Those kinds of things took a long time to develop, but they were always there. And as folks know, they're often associated with dyslexia. So I'm grateful for the gift of dyslexia every day. but I know for children it can be very hard. So as an adult, I actually relearned how to read at age 27. So what happened is I was in grad school, and I want to tell you, it's, people know I was so fortunate. I mean, I went to school at Harvard, the Harvard Business School for graduate school. But what a lot of people don't know is I applied to 12 schools and I got into one. And it was all because of standardized testing. So once again, even at the graduate level, I could not, 11 of those other schools said no to me because of my standardized test scores. But credit to Harvard, frankly, they weight test scores very low. They look at, in this case, in the business school, leadership, and I'd done some things in Cambodia that they were really interested in. So I'm grateful to that school for letting me in, despite my abysmal test scores. And when I got in there, I struggled once again. I mean, it was really hard because the standards there at the graduate school level for what you have to read on a daily basis are just unbelievable. I mean, it took me 3 months and there was no way I was going to get through that program. So what I did is now we're in about 2005. So a lot of things have caught up to sort of modern ways of dealing with learning disorders and things of this nature, and that's great. And so I was so fortunate to catch this about around age 27. And I went to the counselors and so forth, and they were all interested in my story. But the long story is that I was able to get a psychologist who was a student there as well. And I was put in a special program to relearn how to read as an adult dyslexic and relearn also how to do math. And of course, many of you may know this, you learn how to read through phonics, which I never really learned, and then you learn how to count and do mental math with like clay. And again, that might seem surprising to some, but this is now taken me, when I started that program, I read at a 3rd grade level. And so for 27 years, I read at a 3rd grade level. Now I'm a little higher. I'm probably 8th grade. I haven't tested recently, but that program allowed me to function in a way that I could at least get through material that I needed. But other things that are very helpful for adult dyslexics are Excel. And people who know me, I use the Microsoft program or whatever company makes it. But dyslexics tend to have a ability to use Excel for math and other things in a way that often is faster than non-dyslexics. It's one of the gifts of dyslexia. And so in all aspects of my life, but even especially in sort of business contexts like investment banking and things like this, Excel was my crutch, but it was also my power. And folks in these fields know how important for data processing and stuff skills in that environment can be. And it, for me, has been part of the gift of dyslexia. The other one is now audiobooks. So now whether it's podcasts or MP3s, I rarely read, still to this day. I rarely can get through a book. I can rarely get through a speech. And so I have different techniques that I use and so forth to do that. But one of them is now I listen to at least about 3 books a month. And I think part of what dyslexia has given me, I'm able to listen about 3 times speed. It sounds like Alvin and Simon and the Chipmunks, and my family can't stand it when they get in the car and they hear this book just chirping at you. But I have about the same recall on 3 times speed or on 1 time speed. And so again, I think it's part of that gift of dyslexia. So let me wrap up, I think, by just saying this. I hope these stories are at least helpful for some folks out there. I also hope it's helpful in a sense that dyslexia is very challenging, and I'm grateful that now, at least in American society, we're very proactive when it comes to dyslexia. So I don't want to encourage everyone who is experiencing this or through friends or family to make sure and get tested. Testing is very important. Also, I want to make sure and encourage people to find those compensatory techniques that may help. And I also want to note that I know sometimes dyslexia is combined with other learning challenges, and I know that makes it a lot harder. So I'm very grateful for the supports that I had, and that I seem to only really have the dyslexia challenge. But it is something that I know is extremely challenging, and I know it can be embarrassing for adults. I know it can be terrifying for children and frustrating for parents. And so don't give up. I would just hope that you keep trying new ways, and hopefully one of them will stick. And so with that, I appreciate your time today, and we want to wish everyone the very best for Dyslexia Day and Dyslexic Awareness Month.